Hi everyone, welcome to the second of a two-part series on role theory. And in the first video, we discussed that a healthy self is somebody who has access to a wide variety of roles. So if more roles lead to a healthier self, it makes sense that we would want to look at how roles are developed. And that's exactly what we're going to cover in this video. This is going to apply to somebody who has full-blown NPD or just your average person who might be stuck in a moment of your average human narcissism. So I hope this will be enlightening for you. Let's get started. The primary way that narcissism would interfere with our role development is through an inability to separate fantasy from reality. Now, there's nothing wrong with fantasy. It's actually quite healthy to fantasize. In fact, Moreno was a big proponent of fantasy. He believed that as children, we are at a very pure state where we are our most creative and our most innovative. And then as we age, we lose a lot of that creativity and spontaneity. And Moreno was interested in helping people get back some of that creativity. There was one other thing that Moreno said which causes dysfunction. Dysfunction comes from inaccurate role perception. So we are healthy when we accurately perceive the roles of other people as well as our own. But if we can't separate fantasy from reality, that's where we're going to have some problems. So when we look at the life cycle of a role, we start with role imagining. Role imagining is where we start to imagine what would this role be like. There's two ways to leave the imagining stage. You can either have fun with your fantasy and then put it away and enter the real world, or you can take steps to make that fantasy a reality. The first failure of narcissistic role development is a failure to leave the imagination stage. The person remains in fantasy land. So they're not doing anything to progress into the actual role-taking stage. And they're also not putting this fantasy aside and keeping it separate from reality. An excellent example of this is a story that Frank Yeomans tells over at Borderliner Notes. A client who was a 50-year-old woman who said her goal in life was to be an international opera star. Now, of course, this would be a failure to leave the imagining stage. This person is not recognizing the difference between fantasy and reality. And this person is stuck in that stage because they're not taking any real steps to become an international opera star. But at the same time, they're not taking any steps to keep that in fantasy land where it belongs. And so this person is going around saying, this is my goal, this is what I want to be in life. But this person is in midlife. This person is 50 years old and is a secretary by profession. So not very realistic, and that individual is going to remain stuck at that stage and they won't be able to progress through the other stages of the life cycle. The next three stages in the life cycle of a role are actually called the stages of role development because these are the three steps when you're actually in the role. And those three steps are role taking, role playing, and role creating. Role taking refers to the stage where you are just starting a new role. And this is a role that has no improvisation. Your job in this stage is to learn the role. So there's a big learning curve. You might make a lot of mistakes. You aren't really sure if the role fits. You're just kind of finding your way through the role and getting comfortable with it. Once you become comfortable with the role, you then move into the second stage of role development, which is role playing. And in the role playing stage, you feel a lot more confident in this role. It's going very smoothly. You don't really need to ask other people what to do. It's kind of old hat, like you're just doing it. And it kind of becomes second nature. The third stage is called role creating. And this is where a person plays a role with a high degree of spontaneity and creativity. And Moreno says that this is also where a role becomes a personal expression of who you are. So once you get really good at playing a role, you can actually add elements from your other roles and draw upon other parts of yourself to really make that role uniquely your own. You might find ways of playing this role that make the role more efficient. You might find ways of playing this role that make the role more personally satisfying and fulfilling to you. That is the height of playing the role. So let's take the example of a student, somebody who takes on the role of university student. In the very beginning stages, they're just trying to get their bearings. They might get lost on campus. They can't find the building where their class is. They might be late to class because they haven't really judged how much time they need to get from one class to the other. They might spend hours doing homework because they haven't yet fully developed a system for making everything go smoothly. And being able to handle the role strain that comes with role taking. And in the first video, we talked about role strain. And that is when you have a lot of responsibilities that you have to juggle all at once. Role strain is probably the heaviest when you're in the role taking phase, because there's so much that is new to you in the role and you really don't know what you're doing. Once that student starts to get used to the flow of things start to get a little bit easier. They're no longer late to class. They know where all their buildings are. They're not getting lost on campus. They're getting all their homework done on time. Things are going really well. But then when they step into the role creating phase, things are going really great. Over time, the student realizes, you know what? I don't have to read every single word in this textbook. I can just skim through it. And as long as I understand the material, I'm golden. And so they find ways to cut corners without sacrificing the quality of the information that they are taking into their mind. And they're still able to pass the tests and write a term paper without spending as much time on the work as they had done before. That would be an example of role creating. So now that we understand the 3 stages of role development, when we're actually in the role, let's look at the second failure of narcissistic development, and that is failure to separate imagining from reality while actually being in the role. So 2 examples where we've all done this, whether we're narcissists or not, is when we've gone on a job interview and we killed it in this interview. We feel confident. We really feel like we got the job, and we're already planning to quit our present job. We're already thinking about what we're going to do with our new higher salary. We're already thinking about how we want to decorate our office. But then the phone call never comes. And so we kind of jump the gun into thinking that I had this job when really all we had was a killer interview and we didn't actually get offered the position. Or we go on a date and we think, wow, this person is amazing. And we jump the gun and we start imagining what it would be like to be in a full-blown relationship with this person. But we're not in a relationship with that person. We are not in the role of that person's boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife, but we let the imagination run wild And then when that person doesn't call again and offer us a second date, we become devastated. So this is one of the ways that our own narcissism can interfere with that separation. Yes, I'm on a date, or yes, I am interviewing. Yes, I am in the role of career professional. That doesn't mean I'm actually going to be offered this job. And so we need to hold our horses until that role becomes a reality. Otherwise, we can feel really let down and in some cases almost have like a mini narcissistic collapse. It's also fair to say that in situations like this, where role expectation and role demand come into play, it's also a symptom of entitlement, which is another criterion for NPD. The third failure of narcissistic role development is a failure to leave the role altogether. Not all roles are permanent. Many roles are actually temporary. So an example of a permanent role might be ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend. Assuming that you're never going to get back together, that person is always going to be your ex. But some roles are temporary. We might be in the role of broke person and we have no money, but that doesn't mean we're going to be broke forever. It would be wise for us to enter the role imagining phase and think, how could I become a rich person, or at least a person with enough money to pay my bills? So there definitely is a time and a place for roles to end. This is where we get to the final stage of the life cycle of a role, and that is role retiring. Role retiring can happen either within our control or not. If I am in the role of wife, and I don't want to be a wife anymore, I can retire that role and I can ask my husband for a divorce. On the other hand, I may thoroughly enjoy being a wife and I don't want to end that role, but if my husband dies, I have no choice but to end that role of wife. And most of the time, another role will begin. And in that case, in this very morbid example, I will be taking on the role of widow. And the arrow is pointing sort of in between role imagining and role taking, because as I said, sometimes we don't have a choice. And when we don't have a choice, we're forced into taking the role. When we're forced into the role, we don't get the luxury of role imagining. So if one's husband dies unexpectedly, either they had a heart attack or in a car accident, that's it. That person has retired the role of wife and now they are taking on the role of widow. And there's no preparation, there's no imagining or planning involved. That's it. They're a widow. But let's say that person's husband has a terminal illness and they have 6 months to live. Well, then there might be time for that role imagining stage where that person can make preparations for eventually burying their partner and taking on the role of widow as they are retiring the role of wife. So one failure of narcissistic role development is when a person fails to vacate the role and they insist on staying in that role. And again, this is 100% reliant on fantasy. Narcissists do this all the time. When the relationship is over, they usually don't fully move on and they still consider themselves to be your significant other, even though you are technically their ex. They still feel like they own you. But watch out, because we do the same thing. Many times I have clients that even though they know that their partner or their ex is a narcissist, they are still stuck in this fantasy land where they don't want to vacate that role. They keep saying, well, maybe there's a chance that that narcissistic person can change, or maybe there's a way for us to get back together and try again. This person is relying on the role imagining. They are refusing to leave the role and move on with their lives and to take on a new role as a single person who's trying to heal, or just somebody else's girlfriend or boyfriend. Maybe you can get into another relationship. People often don't want to do that because they are stuck in this role. And when we refuse to vacate a role, many times we are in what we call role lock, which is another term that we used in the previous video. There's also some role expectation and role demand with this one as well, because we expected that relationship to last longer, or we demand that that person treat us the way we feel we should be treated. And that applies to both narcissists and non-narcissists. Narcissist wants to be treated like royalty. The non-narcissist expects to be treated like an equal in the relationship. And in both cases, the demands are not being met. So when that relationship ends, both parties are expecting something different. They are demanding that the other person come back, apologize, try to get back together. They're both refusing to leave that role. And so this leaves them stunted and unable to move on. The fourth failure of narcissistic role development is a failure to accurately assess role self-congruence. Now, in the previous video, we talked about role self-congruence, and that is determining if a role is right for you. In other words, does this role fit with all the other roles that I play, and is it compatible with the rest of myself? Narcissistic people, or average people who get tripped up on narcissistic tendencies once in a while, will often reject the other roles that they play in favor of a role that they think is going to be better for them. And that role is completely incongruent with who they are. So for example, if we are actually offered a position, a promotion, a higher rank at work, we might know deep down inside, this isn't a job I'm going to enjoy. This is a job I'm really not good at. This is a job that's not compatible with the other sides of myself. But we might take that role because, oh my gosh, it's a promotion and it's a higher salary. And so this is a failure in narcissistic role development, because now we're trying to nurture a role that really isn't meant for us. And this is one of the main reasons why narcissistic people don't really feel like they are authentic. And it's because they're chasing after roles that are not congruent with their authentic self. Sometimes we don't know if a role is not congruent with us until we actually try it on. And what's great about the role development stages is that we don't actually have to go through all the stages of role development. We can retire a role right away if it isn't working for us. So if I take that fancy job and then after a few weeks, I realize this isn't for me, I don't have to go through role playing and role creating. I can decide to end that position right then and there and say, this isn't for me and I want to go back to my old job. Narcissistic people won't do that. They will struggle with, what will this look like? What is everyone going to think? How can I turn down this prestigious opportunity? And again, they're chasing a rainbow that's not true to themselves. And you don't have to be a narcissist to be stuck in this situation. And I know I'm using a lot of examples of social roles, but all of what I'm saying applies to psychodramatic roles as well. So a narcissistic person might be very artistically gifted, but for whatever reason, the narcissistic person doesn't perceive artistic talent as being very prestigious. And so they will silence the artistic side of themselves and chase after that CEO, that high position in business. Or they may force themselves to major in a discipline that they think is more prestigious instead of following the path that is more congruent with their true talents and skills. Finally, we have the fifth failure of narcissistic role development, and that is a failure to accurately determine when it is time for role relief. We talked about role relief in the previous video. Role relief is being released from a role, but it is different from role retiring. Role retiring is permanent. I am no longer playing this role. Role relief more or less refers to the temporary changing and shifting of roles. It's kind of like this shirt I'm wearing. I don't have to wear this shirt every day. I can change my shirt and wear a different shirt tomorrow, but that doesn't mean I'm going to throw this shirt in the garbage. So many times, narcissistic people have a very difficult time assessing when it's time for role relief. And as Moreno said, this is one of the dysfunctions of the self, is being unable to access a wide range of roles. So a narcissistic person might hang on to a role for dear life because they think this is who I have to be. And they may mistakenly think that if I just give this role a rest temporarily, it's equivalent to throwing it away entirely. And it's not. So what you will see is a narcissist, maybe in a new relationship, they are charming for months on end. And then they're so tired from being charming that they throw it in the garbage. It's like, oh my gosh, I've worn this shirt 50 days in a row. I'm ready to throw it in the trash. And now this is my real self, they'll tell themselves. I personally reject the concept of the true and false self. I only believe in roles. So a narcissist, if that person is able to learn, it's okay. It's okay to be average for tonight. Or it is okay to slip into the background for one evening. That doesn't mean that you've retired the whole entire aspect of yourself as a charming person. You're still a charming person. You're just not center stage that evening. And I know that's asking a lot of a narcissist, but I do believe that there are different levels of narcissism, and perhaps there are some people out there who would be able to learn the distinction between role relief and role retiring. That just because I'm married to somebody, it doesn't mean I have to hang out with my husband every single night. I can relieve myself of the role of wife and go hang out with my girlfriends. But that doesn't mean I'm no longer married to my husband. I'm still a wife. I don't retire the role of wife until I get divorced or my husband dies. So this is where I think narcissists put a lot of pressure on themselves to be on 24/7. And that's exhausting for anybody. And this is where many people will say that the mask slips. I also reject the concept of the mask. I think what happens is that the narcissist just is entering a period of role fatigue because he or she has stayed in that role for too long and didn't shift out of it. And it's healthy to shift in and out of roles. So that narcissist puts a lot of pressure to be on all the time, they get fatigued and then they just chuck the whole role and think, this isn't who I am. I'm being fake. You're not being fake. You're just exhausted. And anyone would be exhausted if they had to be this one-dimensional person all the time. By the way, that's what happens to people who are in relationships with narcissists. They become limited in the roles they play. They become locked into the role of whoever they are to that narcissist. So they're the narcissist girlfriend or boyfriend. There's no opportunity to shift in and out of those roles. And without being able to shift in and out of roles, you cannot develop new ones. So you may have a dream to go back and finish school, but if all your focus and energy is on supporting that narcissist and giving the narcissistic person what they need, you're going to abandon the idea of going to school and you will never enter the role of student. So even though retiring a role often results in taking on a new one, we don't have to retire a role in order to take on a new one. And again, the more roles we have, the healthier our self is. And failure to leave a role doesn't even have anything to do with relationships or jobs. I mean, I just keep using those examples. Those are social examples. But this can happen with psychodramatic examples. One of the things I see a lot in therapy are people who are taking on the psychodramatic role of victim. And they have put so much identity into the role of victim that they don't want to vacate that role. They don't want to leave. And they'll come to therapy week after week after week after week, and they'll keep asking me, how do I get better? How do I fix this? Give me some tips so I can move on. And I'm like bending over backwards, giving them every idea that I can think of that I encourage them to work on. But then they don't work on it. And it's because that person is afraid, for whatever reason, to vacate the role of victim. A lot of times when we have been victimized, we want to hold on to that role because somehow it brings us a false sense of justice. And it really doesn't. So when you refuse to vacate a role like that, definitely that is going to result in a less healthy self because you're not able to shed the role of victim in order to take up other roles like successful, confident, thriving individual. You can't really be a successful, confident, thriving individual and a victim at the same time. So we can definitely see how this is going to stunt the role development process. So this was a brief overview of the stages of role development, what I call the 5 failures of narcissistic role development. I hope this has been helpful to you. Let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts or questions about any of the ideas presented in this video or the 2-part series as a whole. I'm Jen Guerriero, and this is Poisonous People. Thanks for watching.